Okay. Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. My name is Erin Sarles, and I am the co founder, along with who you see on the screen here, this man named Thomas Rowe, who it's all about him tonight. And we are here tonight to celebrate his new book launch. Not just this book launch, really, it's about his transformation of a man who lost everything and chose to rebuild, of a story that needs to be told, of principles that could change your life if you're willing to do the work. But before I introduce Thomas, I just want to take a second and just celebrate Thomas this evening. This is a very important day for him. One of the driving reasons why he wrote the book. So why are we here on May 12th tonight, Thomas?
Well, first of all, Erin, thank you so much for carving out some time to schedule this webinar. Your people talk to my people talk to your people, and our people talk to each other, right? And got this all put together. The significance of May 12th is an important day, and that's because it's my sister Tanya. It's her birthday, and she passed away 10 years ago. This June 2nd. So she passed away 10 years ago, and she battled mental illness. She was manic depressive schizophrenic. So for 40 years, she had to deal with the chaos of schizophrenia and manic depression, and it was really tough on our family. Growing up, the traditional holiday. I know every family has their issues and every family has their obstacles. I get that. I respect that. But anybody who's had to deal with a family member that is battling mental illness, especially something as severe as schizophrenia or bipolar or manic depression, we never knew which Tanya we're going to get. When Tanya passed away 10 years ago, I knew I wanted to set up a foundation in her name, but I just didn't know when and why. And I did in 2023, silenceandnoise.org. And so all the proceeds of this book and all the proceeds of anything that I do in relationship to Silence and Noise goes to NAMI, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And it's an awesome coincidence that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Tanya's birthday is in May. So we always do things to celebrate. This will be the 4th year in a row that we've actually had a workout at Red Rocks Amphitheater. I'm here in Denver. So we meet at Red Rocks Amphitheater, donation-based only. Anybody can come, and we probably one of the most beautiful venues. They have incredible stairs to run. I bring some equipment out there, and we get a good 45-minute workout in. And like I said, it's donation-based. The money that we raise goes to Silence the Noise. In return, that goes to NAMI.
I love it. So we're also celebrating the launch of your book,
right.
From Average to Asset, the T. Rowe F-bombs.
Correct.
But this isn't the first. Why? Give us a little backstory here. Like, what led you to writing this book? But I know that this is your second book that you've actually written.
Right. So yeah, I knew that what I wanted to do is, with your help, T. Rowe F-bombs, we pretty much finished it in January, February, when we were doing all the edits and we were doing all the editing and the publishing and adjustments and everything to make it a polished book. But I knew I wanted to wait until May to celebrate Tanya and bring this out because of the F-bomb, T. Rowe F-bombs. It's kind of a play on words. Everyone thinks of the F word, but there's so many other F-bombs that kind of, that is actually sculpted and made me who I am today after 10 years of doing the work. And, you mentioned this is my second book. We'll get into my first book. But the F-bombs start off with faith. You have to have strong faith. 2 years ago, I found Christ. I'm a strong Christian. I'm very active in my church now, non-denominational here in Denver. So I'm a part of the safety team or security team. It's about being of service. So my faith is super strong. I was raised Catholic. I've shared with you in the past that on Sundays I'd have to go to Mass and then Sunday school, and then we'd have to go to the Officers Club for etiquette class, and then I'd have to come home and mow the lawn and clean the pool and all this other stuff. And it was a structure that gave me, it formed me into a strong young man. And those etiquette classes have come in and paid forward in spades simply because you and I have talked about it. It seems to be a lost or fallen art. So you have faith, then you have family, and then family is the second one, that you have to have strong family. And then from there, your finances have to be really strong. I touch on it in the book. When you spend, COVID completely knocked a lot of people out, and I was not exempt from that. I started a gym, and it blew me out. Just trying to navigate the waters of this new world called COVID and shutdowns and so forth. And I had a very expensive lease agreement with the building, a lease agreement with the equipment in the gym, and like many other Americans, it folded, and I lost everything. Lost 10 years, 15 years of impeccable credit, where I was it was on point. Everything was for my gym. Everything was aimed at the gym, and nobody saw this pandemic coming, and it just derailed me as well as a lot of other people. And then you have to have your fitness. Obviously, I'm in the fitness industry. My slogan is, the only bad workout is the one you miss, right? So just do something, get out, move, whether it's walking or yoga, Pilates. You don't have to do these strong HIIT classes. You don't have to do an Ironman. You don't have to do triathlons and marathons. You just have to get out and move. Fuel is another F-bomb. It's not just what you feed your body, but it's what you feed your mind, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what's really important. For me, yes, everyone who knows me knows I have a sweet tooth, and I've always knocked out, candy and so forth and sweets. I love that. But I balance it with a great diet. I'm super clean now, especially since I've stopped drinking and using drugs. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But also fuel for, what do you feed your mind? Do you sit there and doom scroll? Do you watch Netflix? Or do you read personal development books? And do you listen to podcasts, informative podcasts? And then we get into fashion, basically dress the part. And when I was playing football, when you traveled, you represented the school, you represented the team. So you wore a sports coat and a tie. When you dress like a gentleman, you act like a gentleman. I think that particular one came to a head for me when I was in the airport and I saw people walking around in pajamas, and they had their stuffed animal or their pillows. Like, man, thanks for making an effort. And then fighting. I grew up in Hawaii, and I tell this to a lot of people, and they don't get it. When I say fighting, I mean you need to know how to fight, not just self-defense. I grew up in Hawaii. I was a haole. The last day of school is called Kill Haole Day. It's not urban legend. It's not folklore. It really does happen. The locals will single out some white people or haoles and beat them up. It's just kind of a rite of passage. So that went on for 10 years when I lived in Hawaii. It happened often. So my brothers and I just learned how to fight. My dad put us into a martial arts class where I could understand the fundamentals of self-defense and fighting. And if I needed to use it, I would use it. I never really gravitated towards it, but I've been boxing now for the last 16 years, and I absolutely love it. And I teach some incredible boxing classes. And then from there, firearms. I lived down in Texas. I had a handgun. Back when I lived in Los Angeles, my brothers actually had some handguns and some rifles. I didn't. And then when the George Floyd riots popped off, and they were happening blocks from my house, I literally had the foresight to go over to my brother's house to borrow a revolver of his. And it was a loaded gun on my coffee table. And I was like, what does our world come to? And then when I lived down in Texas, I bought my first handgun, and now I'm getting qualified to use it at church, because you have these people that make threats to pastors and to ministers for what? Just, speaking the word of the Bible, and they got to worry about, their lives being taken. And then lastly is focus over fear. Right? Each day that you have the opportunity to start your day with focus or fear. I mean, things are going to go sideways every day. I mean, you and I've talked about it. It doesn't matter if you're a high school kid, grade school, working professional, things are going to go sideways. You're going to get curveballs all the time. So how do you manage that? You kind of just stay focused on the plan. You don't be fearful of it. And the last F, which is kind of a honorable mention, is forgiveness. That's something that I could sit here and try and preach, but there's a lot of people that I am, still very angry at. And I have to learn to forgive myself for some of the things we'll share with my first book. But forgiveness, if you could take forgiveness and plug it into every aspect of your life, including the F-bombs, faith, was raised Catholic, went through a very sticky divorce in the Catholic Church. Then, you got your family, you got to forgive your family. Then you have to get your finances. I got to forgive myself for the finances, and what could I have done differently? And just to kind of take the forgiveness all the way through the F-bombs and everything else in your life. So F-bombs is kind of an inspirational book. It's kind of a personal development book, and it's part entertainment.
I love it. I think you really open up people up. I mean, one thing I admire most about you is your willingness to just tell your story. Um, and a lot of people don't have that capacity either because of shame or a variety of other factors that I think hold people back from just being in their truth. Life kind of is what it is. It's, do we learn our lessons and move forward?
Right.
And so you have alluded to and shared with our audience that you've written a previous book. What was the first book about? And then how does that, then we'll really start to dive into T-Row F-bombs, because that's what tonight's really about, is the launch of this book.
Okay. Well, I mean, thank you. We pretty much addressed all the bullet points of F-bombs, but I always knew I was a great storyteller, Aaron, and I had a really good friend of mine that I would share stories about my college days, about my younger days, about my single days post my marriage. And she said something really interesting in passing. She's like, the stories that you share with me, you should actually write a book, because every woman has either dated a guy like that or knows a guy like that. And every guy has either been that guy or really close friends with that guy. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because when you think about, 50 Shades of Grey, I don't think too many men are going to be reading that. And you think about Harry Potter, I don't think a lot of adults are going to be reading that. Maybe they are. I don't know. I didn't read either one of them. But, Swim, Bike, Run, Date was my road to Ironman fueled by cocaine, booze, and sex. That pretty much, just the title alone lets you know exactly what's going to happen there. So I was really into triathlons. I competed at a very high level. I've shared this story with you before. I trained on cocaine, raced on Adderall, and I was pushing myself so hard that injuries were just constant when you're training for endurance races. So I was hooked on Percocet and Oxy, and in most of these parties, the people that I surrounded myself with were also high volume athletes. And so if there were women around, there was Viagra, there was cocaine. It was just an endless cycle of debauchery is what it was. And, I'm happy to say that, I haven't touched a pill since July of 2020, haven't touched cocaine since 2021, and I haven't touched alcohol since summer of 23. So I never got into recovery. I just simply stopped doing all the things that are destructive, that just destroy you as a person and you as your identity and you in your psyche. I'm really stoked about that. And I share that story with a lot of people that I'm not in recovery. I just stopped partying. And, for 10, 15 years, I would have people back in LA that would say, 1 or 2 drinks, everybody's all American. 3 or 4, you're kind of a dick. And after about 5 to 10 people telling you that, you're like, okay, I do have a problem. Very high functioning addict and alcoholic, but nonetheless, we never knew when that switch was going to get flipped. There's probably a dozen women that I've dated that'll never talk to me again. I've made amends. I've reached out to them. I've apologized. Kind of one of the steps you would find in AA, but I didn't do it for them, although they deserved it. I did it for myself, and it goes back to what I was talking about in the book, forgiveness, right? So Swim, Bike, Run, Date, that's really what it was about, was just telling a story. And the last thing I want to kind of get into about it was I don't think a lot of people, I've shared this with you before. I don't think, first of all, the people in Los Angeles do not know this Thomas Rowe. They don't know this T-Row. The T-Row they do know, I don't think they really liked me. And how could they? I didn't like myself. I was a liar. I was a cheater. I would gaslight people. I've been called a narcissist, a sociopath, all that. Maybe there's some truth to that. But, honestly, I was guilty of being a playboy and a liar, and that's a pretty shitty thing to do. So because I had such a great practice, because I had such a great gym, I think people just tolerated me. I don't think they liked me. And I know that because I didn't like myself. So, that book was kind of closure for me. I wrote it when I was in Texas, but it kind of just took you through my life all the way up until I left California, which was in the early spring of 2021. So, it was, you know, my past. I'm not proud of it. I'm not ashamed of it. It just was what it was. And it was a story that I knew would be entertaining. And a lot of people did read it. And, you know, a lot of the comments that I got, I was like, wow, dude, that's a lot, you know, and there were some other colorful things said to it. Nothing positive really, other than, hey, congratulations, you wrote a book. But it was also just like, wow, that's, you know, you lived quite a life. You're lucky to be alive. And the answer is, yeah, I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're lucky that you are alive here to tell your story with us today. You know, you wrote in this book at the beginning, T. Rowe F. Bombs, that you almost didn't write this book because you felt like a hypocrite. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. You know, holy smoke. Great question, Aaron. I think the imposter syndrome will set in with anybody and everybody, right? I mean, you could, if you were to corner Tom Brady and say, you know, in front of, you know, the whatever 6, 7 Super Bowls, did you ever think like, why am I here? I'm sure he'd say yes. I can't speak for Tom Brady. So that being said, I thought, okay, how am I going to write this book? You know, and I knew what the premise was. I outlined it. I outlined each one of the F-bombs. And I went through each F-bomb, and I knew that I was like, okay, you fall short on this one. You're a hypocrite on this. You're not honest about this. You know, not that I was lying like I was in, you know, back in LA, but I was just not being honest with myself. So that's kind of where it was a combination of imposter syndrome and just a combination of, if you write this book, can you look yourself in the mirror and you say, this is totally authentic and real? And by the time I finished the book, I said, yes. You know, there was, it's still a work in progress. You know, that really powerful word at the end, the 11th F, which is forgiveness. I'm nowhere near forgiving, you know, my faith. I still battle with that. My family, you know, my finances, you know, my fuel, fashion, firearms, fighting, all that stuff. I still haven't really embraced forgiveness. And I think that's just going to be a daily journey, you know, and that's one that I'm just going to have to embrace in my faith.
So that's pretty profound, because I think, you know, most of the time we read, I don't want to call this a self-help book, or, you know, it's probably a little more personal development, but most of the time we get those books and you think that the person is perfect, or they've, you know, never had any issues. And this is kind of the recipe for success. So how did you come up with the 11? You know, the 11th one is kind of the surprise.
Right.
But how did you arrive at those were the foundation or formulation of who you were as a person?
Yeah.
You were successful.
A great question. I knew that it had to start with forgiveness. You know, believe it or not, that's the 11th F, and that is the honorable mention, right? The one that's encompassing all of the Fs. And as I sat down, it really was a coincidence, to be totally honest with you. You know, I started writing about my faith. You know, what is my faith? Who am I, right? And then, you know, and I was like, you know, what is it in my family that you know, I don't want to blame my family. I want to acknowledge my family. I wanted to get really in tune with that and just see where I could, you know, repair some of the decades of, you know, damage and fractures. And then from there, the finances, you know, having lost everything and filing bankruptcy, I don't want anybody. I was sitting this is a little sidebar. It was December of 2022 or 23, I can't remember. I was sitting in a parking lot at Costco or Target over in Superior, and I was literally on a conference call with my attorney and the judge down in Texas. And it was 17 degrees below zero here in Colorado. I'm sitting there, I'm sitting in my car, engine's off, I could see my breath. And I'm like, you know, if I'm not in hell, and the only reason why I didn't know I was in hell is because I could see my breath and it was so cold. You know, we think of hell as being hot. And I mean, really, it was comic relief. I was like, I'm sitting on this call being lectured by this judge in Texas who can't see me. It's all on a conference call. And I'm just sitting there going, God, I'm in hell right now, but I'm not, because it's 17 below zero, right? And it was just kind of comic relief. So then from after the finances, it was fitness. Fitness has been a part of my life. And then, then it went into fuel. And I was like, wait a minute, there's a theme here. It really kind of developed organically. And then you could plug in a bunch of F's. I mean, fashion, that's kind of, that's kind of the free space on the bingo card. Just dress appropriately, right? I joke around at the gym where I see guys in Crocs or I see them in Vans and I just kind of chuckle. I'm like, dude, dress the part, right? Or if like I mentioned earlier, if I see people in the airport walking around in pajamas, like I really don't care. It is what it is, but the fighting, the firearms, the focus over fear, that kind of all just kind of played into it because maybe my algorithm is different than yours, Aaron, and other people listening, but I get a lot of stuff, in addition to a lot of Christian and faith-based feeds, which I love. I have a tendency to get some violent stuff, and I think that there's a couple of guys that I hang out with that I know that we send each other stuff, and that tells the algorithm, oh, he's commenting on this, he's liking this, and he's sharing it, so we must feed him more of this, which is not a good idea. But there just seems to be a lot of violence. We're seeing a lot of race division, a lot of religious division, a lot of spiritual division, a lot of political division, and it's rising to a head here. And I just think listen, I'm not an advocate of going out and looking for fights. I'm not an advocate of going out there, pulling your gun in the wild west, like a shootout on Main Street. I just think you have to be vigilant, and you have to, something that you and I talk about all the time, be proactive, because if you're reactive, you're in a hole.
Yeah. I know the foundation of the book and in the foundation for you in your life is faith, and I think it's something that we all, I think, struggle with. It's right. Not something I think we all have moments or crises of our faith or what we believe or how connected we are to what we believe. And I know you write about and talk about the Sunday Christian, Monday morning atheist, but I'd love for you to share with our audience just your journey back to Christ. I know you've openly shared that. So, what was that journey like for you to find that foundation again?
Yeah, it's vivid. Like I said, I got married in the Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic, went through a divorce, and I'm still close to my brother-in-law. We send, he's one of the guys we send, crazy stuff to. So we communicate weekly, a couple times. My ex-wife, wonderful woman. We just grew apart, and there's more to that, but that's not a story for this conversation. But when we went through the divorce, the Catholic Church was really hard on us. We got married in Montreal. There's no separation of church and state, so you had to be separated for a full year. And then our parish was St. Monica's, and they were hard on us. And at the time, I was like, wait a minute, this, considering the current events of the Catholic Church, where they were dealing with pedophilia and molestation from the priests, and they were just kind of moving priests around. I didn't understand that hypocrisy, and and I battled with that. And there's a funny story behind that, but that's another story for another time. So I just kind of walked away from the church. I wouldn't say I was agnostic or atheist. I just was unplugged. That's the best way to say it. And then I had a mentor of mine that was, he's a minister, he's a pastor. Shout out to Devon Franklin. He's a very well-respected member of the Christian community. And he was a client of mine. And he said to me, he goes, Tiro, God didn't turn his back on you. The church did, the Catholic Church did. And I was like, oh my God, that's true. And when I moved down to Texas, I share this all the time. Los Angeles is known as the city of angels, right? But it's so dark, and I really feel like Los Angeles has lost its way for those of you friends of mine that are still living in LA, and I don't want to get the phone calls or the debate, the text messages about that, but it's just how I feel, that the city of angels has lost its way, and it's a little dark and it's a little demonic. And when you sit in shit, you don't smell it anymore. And that's, once I went away to Texas, I chose Texas because it was a red state, and it was business open. It was a friendly pro-business, and we were dealing with the lockdowns in California. So when I got to Texas, it reminded me of Hawaii, having grown up in a military family, growing up in Hawaii, where, listen, there was a military base every 5 miles. And I think you had like 10 to 12 bases, you had two Navy bases, two Air Force, two Army, two Marine, two Coast Guard, and you could. And the nice thing about Texas was, I noticed this right away. It's family, faith, and country, and they preach that. And then once I got back into that, I was like, wow, this is awesome. This is awesome. There wasn't the undercurrent of anger and angst that I experienced in Los Angeles. So it was Easter, and I went to this amazing church, and they pulled out all the stops. And of course they did. It was Easter, right? It's like, let's try and win these cafeteria Christians over. And went back the next week. I was like, oh my God, these guys, this is who they are. You've heard that expression, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And I came back the next time. I came back the next time. And every time I was in there, it was just very emotional for me, very emotional. Teary-eyed, like, when I understand when people say you feel the Spirit, there's no doubt I felt it. So I was very involved in the church there. And then I moved here to Denver. And then I knew when I wanted to get baptized, I was going to fly back to that church. And you've seen the video. I've posted it a few times. I'll post it again. Marquise, who was the pastor there, when I left, I said, thank you so much. I said, I'll be back. I'll be back. And I knew what I meant. He didn't know what I meant. And he didn't see me in the line that I was going to get baptized. So the summer of 23, I got baptized. One, I wanted to do it. Two, I wanted to get closer to the Lord. And I just wanted to kind of cleanse myself of who I was and step into the new version of me that was just a strong, believing Christian, and to be of service for God and not of myself, because that's really who I served selfishly when I lived in Los Angeles.
I mean, you write about in the book, and you just kind of alluded to it. I mean, you've shared your past and, who you were, and you talked about this pivotal moment. Like, what advice would you give people, because I would say most people, I think, have a difficult time with a radical change. You talk about, like, you got sober without, going to rehab, or,
right.
It's like, how do you not let the remnants of your past creep back into your present moment?
If I figure that out, that'll probably be my third book. I mean, it's like, you and I talk about it all the time, professionally. Like, you've even called me out. You're like, how do you bike across Route 66, 100 miles a day for 25 days? How do you do an Ironman? How do you do these 14ers? How do you train with some discipline, with just such a strong sense of focus and discipline? But when I ask you to do things for Blueprint, you just fall short. And this is not intentional. I wish I knew, Aaron. I really do. I wish I knew. That's the $1 million question, right? It's just like, I think that everybody's hardwired a different way, and I kind of warned you, or I kind of gave you the heads up when we started Blueprint. I said, look, I know we're dealing with athletes. I know athletes. I know how they work. You're one of the most incredible business people I've ever met. You just, your ability to get things done is just remarkable. It's just, for me, it's inspired me to be better. But I really don't have an answer for you. I mean, I could stop drinking cold turkey. I could stop doing drugs cold turkey, but just, picking up, and I'm not going to hide behind that. I'm learning every day. I'm getting a little bit better, and I'm trying to take the same discipline and principles of, hey, you got to be up, you got to be in the pool at 4:00, you got to swim, for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you got to go home and get ready to go train clients, and then you got a lunch break, and then you got to go to the pool and go for, you go to the track and do a track workout, and then you go home and train clients for the night, and then you come home and you go for a long bike ride. It's just something you just have to do, and it's just, and then that's kind of what I've started to do here with you, is just, I got to write down, what do I need to accomplish? And it's starting to help, but Rome wasn't built in a day, right?
No, it was not. Yeah. Discipline, you talk about in the book being average, going from average to asset. And, I'd love to know what you think is the key to going from average to asset. Like, what does that really take to become, I think, the top of your game, whatever that might be. You know, that's different for every person, but like, how do you really lock into becoming the truest, highest, greatest version of yourself?
That's what F bombs is all about, right? You know, we can joke that, you know, if you hit 350 in baseball, you're going to go into the Hall of Fame, right? Think about that. 30%, if you show up 30% of the time, you're a Hall of Famer. Okay, that's my excuse, Aaron. I give you 300 every time we do. I'm a Hall of Famer, and you're like, no, that doesn't work that way. You know, I this is something I haven't shared with you. I don't share it in the book, but you know, something that kind of motivates me is the F bombs. You apply a 10% rule, right? Every F bomb is worth 10%, and by the time you're done, you have 100%, right? And if you're firing on all cylinders, which is impossible to do, but if you're firing on all cylinders, you're leading a 100% perfect life. But if you're lacking in one of those, if you're lacking in faith, right, take off 10%, 90%, you're still doing okay. If you're lacking, you know, forgiving your family, take off 10%. You see where I'm going with this, right? So to answer your question, I think that you need to, I encourage people to read the book. And another thing is, both books, all proceeds go to Silence the Noise. I think I may have mentioned that at the top of the webinar. If I didn't, I don't make a dime out of this. I'm not Stephen King. I'm not John Grisham. I'm not a writer. I'm not, you know, I'm not hoping to pay my mortgage with the proceeds or the residuals or royalties off the book. But if you apply every one of those every day, like I start off with prayer, right? And then I, you know, send a gratitude text to my family as often as I can, not enough. And then, you know, I focus on, you know, my fitness. I work out every day. I focus on the fuel, remind myself what if I start doom scrolling, nope, you know, read a book. You know, finances, get your finances in check. And that's just really what you need to do is, you know, when it comes down to fashion, dress accordingly. Like, you know, I didn't need to show up here in a suit and tie, but you know, I just can't be in a tank top and a bandana for, you know, for out of respect for you. And then, you know, just lead each day with focus over fear. And just that to me is really it, is I call it the 10% rule. And if you could fire on every day, make a point of giving your attention to one of those F bombs. And that, you know, obviously, you know, not fighting in firearms. You don't have to go to the firing range every day. You don't have to have fist fights in the street every day. But the other ones are more important. And those are the ones you really have to focus in on. You know, and something I really want to address about faith, I don't want to come off as preachy. I believe in Christianity. I believe Christ is my savior. I believe, you know, to use your term, we're in a trust recession. No question about it. We're in a trust recession. We're in a spiritual warfare. But when it comes to faith, do I think Christianity is the way and the light? I do. But if you're Jewish, if you're Mormon, if you're Muslim, if you're Baptist, fill in the blanks, I will respect you as long as you respect me. I will always respect you until you don't respect me. And another thing is just don't be a dick. You know, don't try to tell me how your faith is better than mine. And let's not get into a debate about that. I mean, let's really, really, you need to lean into your faith, whatever that is. And you need to just understand that there's a higher source than you, be of service, and just don't be a dick. And the only thing I'm going to say, because some people have asked me, what are your thoughts on atheist and agnostic? I think that's a cop-out. Make a decision, you know, not making a decision, they say, isn't a decision. I think that you do have the opportunity to make a decision. And that's all I'm going to say about agnostic and atheist.
Well, with that, the other F-bomb that I think really shapes and forms this book is your chapter on family. And we're here tonight to celebrate your sister's birthday.
Right.
And, you know, how did she shape who you are? How did she shape this book? What are some of the life lessons your sister has taught you?
Well, look, Tanya wasn't cut out for this world. She was, I mean, she was a beautiful soul, but just on another plane. the rules and guidelines and guardrails of this world were not for her. She wasn't a malicious person. She multiple suicide attempts, yes, but never wanted to take anybody out. It was hard to have coherent conversations. She was constantly medicated, and when she wasn't medicated, she was lost. She would go to the streets, and there would be times that we wouldn't see her for 2 days, sometimes for 2 weeks. And then we would get that phone call that she's in the emergency room and she had been beaten or raped. And this happened multiple times. It was horrible. One of the most profound things I could say about Tanya is Tanya didn't happen to me. She happened for me. Right. So to be able to really understand that, once she passed, it was about, and I didn't know it at the time, but once she passed, it was my responsibility. It's all of our responsibility to make sure those that don't have a voice have a voice. And I will make sure that Tanya always has a voice. And, I really want to go on record that I really didn't talk about Mark and Matt. Mark and Matt, my younger brothers, they also are sober now. They had a deeper abyss with drugs and alcohol than I did, but they're sober now. And Mark and Matt were incredible athletes. I've shared with you, they were at San Diego State. Both of their backups went on to play in the NFL. They blocked for Marshall Faulk. They were high school All-Americans. Division I starters right out of the gate. Then you got me, who've been an athlete my entire life, Ironmans, and all the other stuff that I've shared. But Tanya was truly the best athlete in the family. I mean, in high school, she was a 3-sport athlete: volleyball, track, and basketball. Was it basketball? I believe it was volleyball, track, and basketball. And she was just a phenomenal athlete. And it was cut short when she was 17, diagnosed with schizophrenia. And you would think and one of the things I have a conversation with about people is, nature versus nurture, chicken or the egg, and we don't know. Was Tanya hearing the voices and she started self-medicating, or was she, like most teenagers, messing around recreational drugs, and then it triggered the schizophrenia? We don't know. All I know is at 17, something wasn't right. We all saw it. We all sensed it. And then from there, she was getting kicked out of schools. She was very combative. She was angry. She was frustrated. And then that's when it just kind of all unraveled from there. She was no longer interested in sports. She was interested in hanging around the wrong people, and it just was a spiral from there. So, for Tanya, it's just about how it shaped things is to make sure, one, that she has a voice still, and two, that we need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about mental illness. We need to talk about mental well-being, and the more that we do that, the more it won't be a negative stigma. It'll be a topic of conversation in any social setting.
Yeah. I know we've had several in-depth discussions about all of this. And so I think there's a big door to open and talk about this stuff, because I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I think when you talk about the one I want to kind of get in the last two, fear and focus, and you talk about them having the same energy, just pointed in the different directions. So how has fear guided your life at times, and what are your lessons you've learned there? And then maybe what are example of times where you've stepped into focus and that's really paid dividends for you?
Moving to Colorado hasn't been easy, especially when you come on, when you have a very successful business, you have a very successful practice. I don't think you're going to be able to get anybody that'll argue with you that COVID was a big reset, not the reset, but a big reset. It kind of changed the landscape of a lot of businesses. So for 2 decades, I was an extremely successful businessman, and I had an incredible practice in fitness and so forth. But being in Colorado, it's been tough. It's been really, really challenging, one obstacle after the other. So, I had to, once you lose everything, for some people, they say it's kind of a relief that, oh, the fear of nothingness, when you have nothing, right? But you still have everything. You have your health, you have your faith, you have your friends, you have your family. And that's one of the F bombs I didn't talk about enough was friends. That's huge, that you are what you surround yourself with. But the fear factor of here is like, can it happen again? Can I lose everything again? And then I had to just remind myself, maybe, dude, you might. But is that what you want to focus on, is losing everything? Or do you want to focus on building something? And I was like, that's when I made the decision. It's time to build something. And you've been really instrumental in that. You're like, dude, I believe in you. A lot of people do. So, there's a lot of close friends that really do believe in me. But if you don't believe in yourself, it doesn't matter what other people believe. And you kind of said it. You're like, we were working one day and you said to me, you're like, dude, you're playing small. You're playing small and you got to step up. You got to step into your greatness. And it wasn't a lecture from you, and it wasn't a dig. It was just like, you saw it. My really good friend, Bill Manson, saw it. And, other mentors saw it. So I was like, okay, they believe in me. I have to believe in myself. Let's set the fear aside and let's focus on building and winning.
Yeah. One of the quotes that I think is so profound, and I don't have it in front of me, but it's by Marianne Williamson. And it came to me when I was going through my certification as a professional coach. And it really talks about we're more afraid of our light than we are darkness.
Yeah.
We become very comfortable in our shadows. It almost is, it's our ego. It likes to keep us comfortable. It likes to keep us in the dark. And so to truly stand in our full greatness and our true presence is why God brought us here, and so grateful that I have the opportunity to reflect that to you.
Right.
I know that that's why God put me on this earth, is for people to realize the truth of who they are, and we all have a superpower. We all have a purpose.
Right.
And I want to, activate people into that. And so, one of the things I'd love to talk about before we get into, I think, the work you and I are doing now is the one that might be your Achilles heel, maybe not, but the one you talk about struggling with the most is forgiveness. And I think kind of twofold, like, I think forgiveness comes with radical ownership of who you are. And I think loving every aspect of that, the good, the bad, the ugly, we're just humans. We're infallible in a good way.
Right.
God wouldn't know himself if he didn't have us to experience life through. And so I would love for you to just talk about the journey of, I think, self-forgiveness, and radical self-ownership, because you talk about looking in the mirror. So how do you do that? How do you walk yourself through that to get to a place of just radical self-love and acceptance?
When I get there, I'll let you know. I think it's okay to be really hard on yourself. I do. Now, there's a difference between beating yourself up, right? You can hold yourself to a high standard. You can have high expectations for yourself, but you can't beat yourself up, and we've talked about this before. Words are powerful. You can't look in the mirror and I'm not going to say you sit in the mirror and just tell yourself those bullshit affirmations, you're great. Everyone loves you. You're a perfect, that type of stuff from, Saturday Night Live. But you can't sit there and look in the mirror and just say you're worthless. You're a loser. Get your shit together. You're a fuck up. That doesn't work either. I think that it really comes down to, honest to God, the more I read the Bible, the more I realize that is our owner's manual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go to any of the viewers, go to your car, go in the glove box. There's a owner's manual, how to use the radio, how to use Bluetooth, what to do if the engine light comes on, what to do. I mean, it's all right there. And I truly believe that, if you, I'm going to date myself. I remember I bought a VCR in college and I opened it up and there was these directions and I just threw the directions to the side because I'm like, oh, you plug it into the TV, plug it into the wall. And it was a mess because you had to, there were certain things you had to do, even though there was a plug and a couple coax cables and there was a remote, and we all know back in the 80s and 90s, you had 15 remotes, on the coffee table. So the point is there was an owner's manual. Read the owner's manual and you'll have to assemble the VCR once. That's it. Read the Bible, understand the Bible, and you're not going to understand it every day. Every time that I've read the Bible, like I've read it and and it's easy to say, oh, that applies to this. And that same passage, you'll read it a little bit later and it hits differently. So I think that, you have to make the right steps in the right direction. And I truly believe that if you start every day in prayer, meditation, whatever you want to call it, I have a daily devotion. I read a passage of the Bible every morning before I walk out the door. And that kind of sets me on the right path versus, getting up, doom scrolling, checking your email, checking your social media, and that just sets the pace. So I can't really answer that, as far as forgiveness goes, because it's a daily journey for me. It's a daily journey. There's certain getting cut off. Do I need to flip them off and honk my horn? No, I forgive that person. But there's people in my past that, I considered very close friends, almost like family, that have betrayed me. And I'm having a hard time forgiving them to this day. And it doesn't, I'm not going to flatter myself to say they think twice about me. So why am I thinking about them? Forgive myself, forgive them, move on. But I know I'll get there, just like I did with my sobriety. I knew that one day I had to stop drinking and stop using. And that day came and I celebrated it. That's going to happen with my forgiveness for other people. I'm going to wake up and go, okay, it's here. The forgiveness fairy is here and I forgive.
Well, send that fairy my way whenever they arrive.
We all need it.
Well, I think it just goes back to what you talked about before, is returning ourselves to truth.
Right.
There is truth. There is, I believe, one truth. And I believe that truth is God and the nature of God and who God is. And that's an abiding love. And so I think if we return to that, start our day in that, it makes our days much, much easier, which I love. So on this journey, tell our viewers that follow us weekly, how did you arrive at Blueprint? Like, what was the calling on your heart? Why does this feel like your life's purpose? Share it with all of us.
I'm very proud of all the races that I've done. I've shared in previous posts on social media. My goal is to do 55 races by the time I turn 55, and I accomplished that. 30 triathlons, 1 Ironman, 2 half Ironmans, 3 full marathons, a dozen half, 10 Spartan races, century rides, biking across Route 66. I was always battling this ghost that didn't exist, and that was my father. I felt like, I was the athlete that was supposed to go on to the NFL. That was my dream, and that was cut short because of an injury. And then Mark and Matt came up, and they, achieved a lot of success, and I felt like I had something to prove to my dad, right? So then once I moved back to Los Angeles, I started mentoring kids, young men and women, in high school, I should say, not really young. But I said, look, let's find a school that matches your skill set. Because when I was coming up, it was always, D1, USC, UCLA, Ohio State, Nebraska. There was no D2, there was no D3. It wasn't on anybody's radar. So the probability, we talk about all the time, the probability of going pro, the probability of going to the Olympics is really, really small. So why not use your sport, your athletic ability to get you to school, play the sport you love, and get a great education? It's a win-win. And, like you talk about going to Black Hills State. Aaron, I'd never heard of Black Hills State until I was in my 50s, right? And
Shout
then,
out to Spearfish, South Dakota, and the Yellow Jackets for all my friends that
there you go.
still live there.
Right. And, like even USD in San Diego, I think that was a small Division II school at the time, but that was in the shadow of San Diego State. And that was in the shadow of USC and UCLA. So I really want these kids to have a mentor. It wasn't my dad's fault. My dad was a wonderful person, a wonderful man, and a great leader and a great mentor. But the calling behind Blueprint to Blue Chip is just that. If you follow our blueprint, you will become a blue chip, not just athlete, but person, right? Mm-hmm. And when we say blue chip, doesn't mean that you're going to go start at Ohio State and win the Heisman Trophy. It means that who are you going to be long afterwards? I would tell people that after high school, as far as sports go, you're lucky to get 4 to 5 years. Lucky to get 4 to 5 years. But after college, you have 40 to 50 years of your career, right? Imagine that, trading 1 year for a decade of work when you're in college. And, one of the things I really stress to these young men and women, we're probably going to get some letters for this. We'll probably get some emails for this, but I'm just going to put it out there. The educational system right now is a complete circus, right? And we're not here to fix that. Get yourself a college degree. It helps, but you don't have to have a college degree. We've worked with athletes. You and I have worked with athletes that played football or baseball, went to JUCO, and then they went into becoming, general contractors. And that's great. That's what my brothers do, and they're very successful. Not everyone's meant to work behind a desk, right? So, what if? And I tell people this. I tell the families that we work with, and I tell the athletes that we work with. I learned more in the locker room and the fraternity house than I ever did in a classroom. It's important to show up and get good grades. I totally agree with that. But, the legacy that you'll learn, the friendships that you'll learn out of the locker room, I'm still friends with these guys, 40 years later. And then from the fraternity, I've got friends that are in the same fraternity, really good guys. And you can always lean on those legacies. You can always lean on those networking groups. And that's really important. So Blueprint to Blue Chip is really about mentoring young men and women to step into their greatness. And, and I learned that from you because I've always focused on bigger, faster, stronger. And you're like, well, what about the character side? What about who they are after the sport? What about, making sure their identity isn't their position and isn't their sport? And I joke with you and I said, that's not my problem. And you're like, it is your problem. You need to embrace this. You need to, if you're going to take on that responsibility of a mentor, you don't get to pick and choose, the things that you got to bring the whole package. And for that, I thank you. And I think that a lot of young men and women, athletes and families will continue to thank us for that reason.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We are here to touch many, many lives. And it's definitely a calling greater than ourselves. And right. I think that's powerful. And we want people to step into that as well. Is things that you're going through or learning are just part of the journey. Right. Or you're learning the lesson. And I think this book really reflects the principles of what we're trying to teach. Yeah. At Blueprint is like, it's not about, did I pass or fail? Did I succeed? Or did I win or lose? It's about, what did I learn? Correct. What was developed in me in that moment? Because that's also a suspension of judgment. I think where we hold resentment or that inability to forgive and move forward within ourselves is oftentimes in that self-judgment, like I shoulda, woulda, coulda. Oh, yeah. Versus what was this lesson or this moment teaching me? Right. And so that's the mirror I think we're trying to hold up for these young athletes as well as for ourselves. We're both walking this journey alongside of them because we're human beings. I by no means have it figured out or mastered. If I ever do, y'all know about it. I'll tell you the recipe of success, but it's a journey every day. And so I think that's really cool that you found who you are. I think done the reflection in the mirror,
Right.
and then said, how do I teach others to do the same? Because, you know, the only way you change, and you've taught me this, and I'd love for you to expound on this as we kind of close this out, is, you know, the only way you can really change or want to be different or step into who you're meant to be really comes down to radical ownership. It's that looking in the mirror and
Yeah.
saying, okay, who, the gut check, who am I really? Not the lies I want to tell myself.
Right.
We all do it. Oh, you're not that bad, Aaron. Oh, that wasn't, you know, but that radical like ownership to go, okay, let's really do a gut check, neither good nor bad, but to really go, okay, who am I and who do I want to be? And what do I have to shift within myself to become that? And so I think that's one of the principles and greatest lessons you've brought to Blueprint is you have to look yourself in the mirror and be radically honest with yourself. And I don't know if that's from your own practice or where that came from, but I just want to celebrate that because that's where transformation really occurs.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you're right. You know, again, you know, walk with Christ. You know, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and get on a soapbox and preach the Bible to you. That's not my calling. You know, my calling is to lead by example and share with you about my faith of Christianity and my walk with Christ. I hope that you find it. I hope that everybody finds it, and I hope they find their peace within their faith. You know, hopefully it's Christianity, but if it's not, but that being said, is, you know, I had to look myself in the, you know, in the eye. I had to look myself in the mirror, and I'm like, do you like what you see? You're a liar. You're a cheater. You're a drug addict. You're an alcoholic. You're full of anger, and you're full of resentment. Let me ask you this, Aaron. Would you want to hang out with that guy?
Probably not.
Probably not. Why do you think I'd want to hang out with that guy, especially when it's me?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do a radical change. You know, the lying and the cheating, I had to own it, and I had to make amends to apologize for that. Then I had to stop using drugs. I justified it. You know, I was like, well, I'm only doing it to race. You know, I'm not like, it's not like I'm in a back alley or in a shitty hotel doing crack. Addicts can justify anything,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so I had to stop drinking. I had to stop using. I had to find truth. And in order to find truth, I had to find God. In order to find God, I had to stop the lying, and I had to own it and apologize for it. So you have to do a radical change, you know, and there's the expression, a leopard can't change its spots and all this other shit. And I believe that's true. You know, I believe that's true. A leopard can't change its spots. That's implying that you're cured. Every day is a walk in, you know, to be great, to be, you know, to be honest, to be faithful, to be in your calling, right? You know, like I loved martinis, right? Unfortunately, when I drank alcohol, I had to have cocaine. It was peanut butter and jelly for me. I wasn't able to turn one off without the other. I was at a bar and I saw a beautiful martini, and I was like, I would love to have a martini. But thank God I had the foresight to know that one martini, and some people might say, you know, don't sit at the bar. And I'm like, well, that comes down to discipline. You know, that comes down to discipline and being able to say no. So I saw that martini and I thought, yeah, one martini probably wouldn't be that bad. But then I immediately was like, one, you can't turn it off. One leads to two, two leads to four. Then you're going to feel like shit the next day. Then you've broken this 3 years of sobriety. Then you're going to start drinking. Oh, I'm just going to start drinking on the weekends. I'll only drink, you know, during the playoffs. And then that's going to lead to cocaine, and that's going to lead to, you know, arguments, and that's going to lead to an unraveling, right? So now I have the foresight. It's not impulsive. I understand there are consequences that come with that. And all the work that you've done, which is, you know, a decade of work, can be unraveled in a night, in a day, in a week, in a month, right? So I think that the takeaway here is every day. Every day. I know that the AA is one day at a time. I get all that. But for me, it's just like, just be better today than you were yesterday. Be better tomorrow than you were today. And you're going to trip and fall. You're going to make mistakes, no question. Get back up and keep moving.
Yeah. I think as we wrap this up, I want you to share where people can buy the book. But yeah, it's that unequivocal, and why one of our principles that underpins is discipline. Like, you just can never negotiate with the life that you want. And
That's awesome. That is awesome. You're so right. Say that again for the people in the back.
You can never negotiate with the life that you want. So whatever life you want, every choice you make in any given moment is a decision towards that or away from that.
Right.
And we justify, I mean, that's such a beautiful example of, like, we can justify being average by saying this won't hurt me today, or I can do this right now, or, we didn't get into you got to read the book, whether it's food, how you negotiate. We all are negotiating with ourselves.
Sure.
And we're either stepping into our truth, our highest truth, and being so disciplined in that it's like, yeah, I don't need that because that doesn't serve where I'm going. And so that's what greatness takes. And that's what we're all here capable of doing. And I think, just thank you for being so open, being so vulnerable, telling your story, putting yourself out there. That takes tremendous courage and strength, because we can all learn from that. So it's not like about judging you. If you're sitting here listening to this and judging him, you're already losing the battle. This is about, how do you take this and apply this to yourself,
right,
to win your life, to become who God intended you to be, which is to step into our greatness. And let me just give you the secret recipe. If we all stepped into really the truth of who God made us to be, the planet and this earth, our problems would truly be solved. And so
right. I mean, just to build on what you said, and this is where I find peace, is when when I was writing this book, I think you asked me and somebody else, aren't you afraid of somebody judging you? And I said, I've judged myself so much harder than anybody could ever judge me. So the answer is no. Just put it out there, let the cards fall where they may. And yeah. Well, Aaron, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for opening up this platform for me to share about the book, Zero F-Bombs, Average Asset, to talk about Swim, Bike, Run, Date, to talk about Silence the Noise, to talk about, most importantly, Blueprint to Blue Chip, and just the impact that we're making with young men and women, with families, with coaches, and reshaping the landscape of life and athletics. So thank you.
You are so very welcome. I dropped the link for the book in the chat, so please grab it. Please go buy your copy. As Thomas shared, all proceeds go to NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and continue to support us, continue to watch us, because we are on a mission to change the world. And so thank you for all of you that watch and are a part of it, because we couldn't do it without you. So thank you again. Thank you, Thomas. And we will see you guys next week or tomorrow. Actually, join us tomorrow. We have a special guest about mindset. So we have lots going on with Mental Health Awareness Month. So join us tomorrow.